In the frozen heart of Siberia, where the winds howl across endless forests of larch and pine, a cave lies hidden among the crags of the Altai Mountains. For tens of thousands of years, snow has drifted across its entrance, sealing it from the world outside, while deep inside, silence has reigned. To an untrained eye, the cave looks ordinary, just another hollow carved into limestone by water and time. Yet in 2008, that darkness gave up a secret that would shake the very foundations of what it means to be human. A team of Russian archaeologists, searching not for legends but for traces of ancient life, crawled into the cave known as Denisova. Their flashlights cut through the dust, illuminating the walls, the scattered bones of animals long extinct, the blackened patches of ancient hearths. And there, among fragments of teeth, stone tools, and shards of long-forgotten lives, they found something so small it could have been overlooked entirely. A sliver of bone, barely the size of a fingernail, smooth, curved, fragile. To most, it might have seemed insignificant. To science, it was the spark of a revolution. Imagine the hands that once bore that fragment. Was it from a child playing near the fire? From a woman gathering wood for the long winter? From a man who had braved the hunt and returned to his family? No one could have known then. At first glance, it might have been mistaken for the bone of a wolf or a bear, the remnants of a meal discarded in the ash. But careful eyes recognized something different. The fragment was human, or at least, it belonged to something very close. No inscriptions marked it. No artifacts declared its owner's identity. It was silent, unyielding. Yet within its tiny structure lay a story written in code older than any book, a story etched in the fragile spiral of DNA. The cave itself had always carried a sense of mystery. Generations of locals whispered about spirits inhabiting the mountains, about shadows that flickered in torchlight, about presences unseen but felt. Archaeologists had already uncovered Neanderthal remains in other parts of Eurasia, and it was natural to assume that the same lived. They hunted the great beasts of the Ice Age. They carved tools from stone. They gathered beneath the shelter of caves as firelight danced across the walls. We did not know their names. We did not know their language. We did not even know they had existed. And yet, their blood still flows in us. For they were not Neanderthals, nor were they Homo sapiens like us. They were something else, a people now called Denisovans, named after that cave, after that single fragment of bone. The story begins small, almost invisible, with a fragment no bigger than a coin. But in its spirals of genetic code lay evidence of a lineage unknown. For centuries, humanity has asked questions of its past. Who were our ancestors, and how did we come to rule this earth? We thought we knew the answers, that the story of human evolution was a tree with a few branches leading steadily toward us. The discovery at Denisova shattered that illusion. Suddenly, the family of man was larger, more tangled, more mysterious than we had ever dreamed. The scientists working in Leipzig knew the risks. Ancient DNA is fragile, degraded by time, easily contaminated by the touch of modern hands. Even a stray breath could erase the past. The fragment was treated with the utmost care, placed in sterile rooms, subjected to techniques honed on Neanderthal bones. The machines hummed, sequencers whirred, data poured into computers. Bit by bit, the genome assembled itself, a puzzle millions of years in the making. At first, the team expected to see the familiar signature of Neanderthal DNA, perhaps a regional variation. But what appeared on their screens was something no one had seen before. It was human, yes, but not like us, and not like them. It was a cousin from a branch of the tree no one had charted. Back in the cave, as winter snow covered the entrance, no one could imagine the global impact that tiny discovery would make. The story of the Denisovans is not just a tale of bones and sequences. It is the rediscovery of a people who once walked this earth, a people whose voices are lost but whose genes whisper through time. They remind us that we are not stories. Did they sing? We do not know. We only know that they were real as us, as real as the fire that warmed them, the tools that fed them, the land that sustained them. And from a single bone, we are beginning to hear their voices again. The fragment of bone traveled thousands of kilometers from the frozen silence of Siberia to the sterile glow of European laboratories. In that journey, the story of humanity itself shifted. For decades, we had believed the world of the Ice Age was simple, inhabited by two species: the robust Neanderthals, who endured the cold of Europe, and Homo sapiens, our own kind, who ventured out of Africa to conquer the globe. The narrative was elegant, almost comforting in its clarity. But reality, as the Denisova discovery would prove, was far messier, far richer, and far stranger than we imagined. As the scientists carefully extracted DNA from the bone, every molecule told a tale written in the deepest code of life. Ancient DNA is fragile, degraded, often splintered into fragments shorter than a sentence on this page. Recovering it is like piecing together a shattered manuscript that has been scattered for tens of thousands of years, each letter worn away by time. Yet in Leipzig, the machines hummed, reconstructing fragments, aligning patterns, searching for meaning in the silence of ages. At first, they compared the sequences to Neanderthals, expecting overlap. And indeed, there were similarities, familiar echoes of another human species that had long been known. But soon, unmistakable differences emerged. Not minor variations, but deep divergences, gaps that told a startling truth. This bone did not belong to a Neanderthal, nor did it belong to a modern human. It belonged to something else entirely. The scientists paused, questioned, rechecked their work. Could contamination be at play? Could a mistake in the sequencing produce such anomalies? But the data held firm. This was not an error. This was a genome never before seen. A genome that suggested, hidden in the caves and forests of Eurasia, there had lived a people as close to Neanderthals as Neanderthals were to us, yet distinct in their own right. They were human, cannot say. Their hair, their eyes, the curve of their noses, mysteries still. But in that bone fragment, the possibility of vision began. DNA is not merely data, it is memory carried across millennia. And within Denisovan DNA lies the memory of adaptation, survival, intermingling, and disappearance. The cave where the fragment was found is not empty of stories. Archaeologists have uncovered layers upon layers of human activity there. The hearths speak of long nights and warmth against the Siberian chill. The stone tools reveal a craftsmanship shared with others of the Pleistocene world. The bones of animals tell us of hunts, of diets, of choices made in the struggle to endure. But when that one small bone spoke through DNA, it told us there were more actors on the stage than we had ever guessed. This discovery raised questions that have not yet been answered. How many Denisovans were there? Did they roam across the steppe in small bands, or did they form thriving communities across continents? Did they have art, music, language? Or were they silent, practical survivors, leaving little trace beyond what the earth accidentally preserved? Every answer we find opens a dozen new mysteries, and behind it all is that fundamental question. If they were so close to us, Why are they gone while we remain? The cave itself seems almost aware of the secrets it guards. Denisova is not just any cave. It has been inhabited for over 300,000 years, layer upon layer of occupation preserved like pages in a book. Neanderthals lived there. Denisovans lived there. Even modern humans visited it. It is a crossroads of our species, a place where cousins shared firelight, perhaps even lives. Imagine that. 3 different human species, 1 cave, 1 moment in deep time. What did they see in one another's eyes? Did they fight? Did they share? Did they love? We cannot know. Yet in the silence of the cave walls, perhaps their voices still echo. The bone fragment was only the beginning. Soon after, scientists would discover a tooth, a massive molar unlike that of any modern human. Its ridges, its thickness, its very size spoke of jaws built for another kind who are gone. Consider what it means to look into a mirror and realize you carry pieces of another species within you. For Denisovan DNA is not gone. It survives, woven into our genomes, living proof of encounters between them and us. In certain populations today, in the highlands of Tibet, in the islands of Melanesia, in the jungles of Southeast Asia, fragments of Denisovan code endure, shaping who we are. When a Sherpa climbs Everest with lungs adapted to thin air, when a child in Papua carries immunity against ancient diseases, they carry Denisova with them. It is not merely history, it is presence. And so, from one fragment of bone, an entire people emerge, not as ghosts, but as ancestors, as kin. They remind us that our story is not singular, not simple. It is vast, branching, unfinished. In the cold silence of the cave, in the hum of laboratories, in the pulse of our own blood, the Denisovans live again. When we hold that fragment of bone in our imagination, it is easy to see only its size, its insignificance compared to the grand sweep of history. Yet in truth, it represents something profound. For that small piece of finger bone is not just a relic. It is a doorway into another world. Through it, we begin to glimpse the shadows of an entire people whose faces we have never seen, whose voices we cannot record, whose footsteps have been erased by ice and time. And yet, their existence is undeniable, etched into both the earth and our very cells. Think of the world they inhabited. It was not the world of cities and empires, of books and machines. It was a world raw and unyielding, where survival was carved daily against the bite of the Ice Age winds. Herds of mammoth thundered across the plains, their tusks gleaming ivory against the snow. Woolly rhinoceros, giant elk, cave lions, and hyenas stalked the forests and steppes. Rivers froze in winter, then burst with life in spring, carrying fish and game to those who knew how to take them. The Denisovans were part of this tapestry, as vulnerable to it as any other creature, and yet also uniquely human in their ability. Silence. Their stories, if they told them, have vanished into the dark. Only their bones remain, and the secret code within them. But in that code lies more than silence. It lies continuity, the unbroken chain of life that connects them to us. Imagine for a moment one Denisovan child sitting by the fire in that cave. Her parents are nearby, watching the flames, sharpening spears, weaving fibers into rope. The child holds a piece of flint in her hand, striking it clumsily against a core, sending sparks of stone into the dirt. Perhaps she laughs at the sound, or cries when the edge cuts her finger. That small injury may be the very reason her bone ended up in the cave, preserved through time, until archaeologists would find it thousands of generations later. She could not have known that her small act, her tiny wound, might one day reveal to the future that she and her people had lived, had loved, had been. There is something haunting in this thought. For what else have we missed? How many other species of human have left no trace at all? Their bones crumbled to dust, their stories erased. The Denisovans are not just a discovery. They are a reminder of our ignorance. We know so little of our past, and yet we are bound by it in every breath. We live with their legacy inside us, but their world remains a mystery. The cave gives us fragments, and the fragments ask questions. When the geneticists first revealed the Denisovan genome, the shock reverberated through the scientific community. Here was proof of another species of human, one that had interbred with us, one that had influenced our evolution. But outside the laboratories, in the imagination of the public, the discovery ignited something older. Our fascination with lost worlds, with forgotten cousins, with the possibility that we are not the only ones who once called this planet home. Myths across cultures have long spoken of giants, of strange beings who lived before us, who shaped our fate. Perhaps, in some distant way, those myths echo memories of encounters with others, Neanderthals, Denisovans, species now vanished but once real enough to touch. Give us only fragments, teeth, chips of bone. The cave is generous compared to the rest of the world, but even there they are elusive. This elusiveness is part of their mystery, part of what makes them so compelling. They are known to us not through faces, but through sequences of letters on a screen, strings of A, T, C, and G. They are a species of data, a humanity reconstructed in laboratories rather than museums. And yet, they were flesh and blood, as real as the snow that fell on their cave, as real as the mammoths they hunted, as real as the stars they gazed upon in the endless Siberian night. The opening of their story is not a revelation, but an invitation. The bone does not tell us everything, but it invites us to ask. Who were they? How far did they travel? What did they build? What did they leave behind? And perhaps most haunting of all, why did they disappear? These are not questions with simple answers, but they are questions that guide us deeper into the labyrinth of our shared past. Every excavation, every analysis, every fragment that emerges from the soil adds a word, a phrase, a sentence to the unfinished story of the Denisovans. And so we return to the cave, to that darkness cut by the beam of a flashlight. The archaeologists on their knees brushing away dust could not have known that the small fragment they lifted would become one of the most important discoveries of the century. They could not have known that it would rewrite the story of humanity, adding a new character to a drama already rich with complexity. But they did know one thing, that in the silence of the earth, secrets still wait to be found. The Denisovans are one such secret, but they will not be the last. The cold winds of Siberia still sweep across the Altai Mountains today, carrying with them the same biting chill that once wrapped itself around the Denisovans. In winter, snow buries the valleys, turning the forests into cathedrals of silence. It is in such silence that their traces endured, not as statues or carvings or monuments, but as dust and bone, as fragments left behind by chance. That to find an entirely new species within a single bone fragment was like uncovering a forgotten chapter in a book thought complete. It was a reminder that our story is not finished, that we are still only beginning to understand who we are and where we come from. The Denisovans were not an accident or an outlier. They were a branch of humanity that thrived, spread, and left a legacy still written into our bodies. And though their faces are unknown, their presence is undeniable. The caves of Siberia, dark and unyielding, have preserved evidence of more than just Denisovans. Layers reveal Neanderthals, modern humans, even animals whose lineages are gone forever. This convergence of species in a single place makes Denisova Cave a kind of cathedral of human history. It is not just a shelter of stone, but a stage where different kinds of humans crossed paths. Did they encounter one another here? Did Denisovans and Neanderthals share the same fire on different nights, or even on the same night? Did modern humans later walk across the same floors, stepping over the ashes of cousins already gone? We know now that these meetings were not merely confrontations of strangers. They were encounters that changed us. The very fact that Denisovan DNA survives in us proves that barriers between species were not absolute. They mingled, they interbred, and their genes live on. To realize this is to understand that humanity is not a story of isolation, but of entanglement. We are the sum of many, shaped by encounters both tender and violent, by unions both fleeting and lasting. Still, in this beginning of the Denisovan story, we are haunted by their absence. Why are their bones so scarce? Why do we find only teeth, fragments, shards, as if the earth itself is reluctant to reveal them? Perhaps their populations were never as numerous as ours. Perhaps their habitats left fewer remains to fossilize. Or perhaps we have not yet looked in the right places. Whatever the reason, they come to us not as crowds but as whispers, as silhouettes flickering in the dark. Reach. We long to reconstruct their faces, to hear their words, to know their thoughts. And yet, we must accept the fragments as they are, and learn to read them as carefully as possible. In this way, the Denisovans are both familiar and alien. Familiar because their DNA flows within us, because their struggles mirrored ours, because their world of fire and stone was once our world too. Alien because they are gone, because their bones refuse to tell us the whole story, because their culture, if it existed in recognizable form, has been lost to time. To explore them is to step into a twilight zone of human history, where certainty fades into speculation, and science is forced to imagine what cannot yet be proved. The mystery of their discovery lies not only in the question of who they were, but in the broader realization that our story is filled with hidden chapters. If the Denisovans remained unknown until the 21st century, what else remains buried, waiting to be uncovered? How many other human species once walked this earth, their bones now dust, their names never spoken? How many cousins lived and died without leaving even a whisper behind? The Denisovans remind us of humility, of how much we do not know, and how much we still must learn. So we return again to the cave, to that moment in 2008 when a sliver of bone was lifted from the dirt. The archaeologists could not have known the full extent of what they had found. They could not have known that within that tiny fragment lay the key to rewriting the human family tree. They could not have known that the bone would one day reveal not just another species, but a people whose genes would be traced across oceans and mountains, from Melanesia to Tibet. All they knew was that something small had been found, something worth saving, worth studying. From such small beginnings, revolutions are born. And so the opening of this story does not close. It lingers, as all mysteries do, inviting us deeper. The bone was only the first page of the Denisovan chapter, but already it told us enough to know that our past is richer than we dreamed, our family larger than we believed. Into it is to walk into deep time, to feel the presence of countless generations who passed before. Among them were the Denisovans, whose faint traces linger not only in this cave, but in the very blood of their distant descendants. The story of their rediscovery is one of patience, persistence, and surprise. For decades, archaeologists had been digging in caves across Eurasia, unearthing Neanderthals, tools, ornaments, and the occasional remains of early Homo sapiens. Each discovery added to the puzzle, yet the puzzle seemed nearly complete. Few imagined that an entirely new species awaited us in the 21st century, hiding in plain sight. It was almost as though the Denisovans had chosen invisibility, fading into the margins of history, leaving behind so little that only the most advanced science could resurrect them. And perhaps that is why their mystery captivates us so deeply. They are a reminder that the world still holds secrets, that the past is not a closed book but a library with unopened volumes. Consider the fragility of their presence in the record. A fragment of bone, a tooth, a sliver of jaw, that is all we have. From such scraps, entire lives must be imagined, and yet from those scraps, science has revealed continents of information. The genome of the Denisovans, extracted from such fragments, is one of the most complete genomes of any extinct human species. Ironically, we may know more about their DNA than we do about their appearance, more about their genetic legacy than about the sound of their voices or the shapes of their tools. It is as though they are both revealed and concealed, illuminated and hidden, a paradox embodied in a species. In the glow of a documentary, the camera lingers on the cave entrance as snow drifts downward, settling on stone. The narrator's voice reminds us that in this place, long ago, the Denisovans lived. We imagine them moving through the forest, their footprints pressing into fresh snow, their eyes scanning the horizon for prey or danger. They are not abstractions. They are people. And yet, unlike us, they will leave no art on the cave walls, no sculptures, no enduring from a place rather than a person. Denisovan derives from Denisova Cave, itself named after a hermit, Denis, who lived there centuries ago. The cave gives them identity, anchors them in geography, in the soil of Siberia. Without the cave, they would remain invisible. With it, they step back into the light of science and imagination. In this way, the cave is both tomb and cradle, a resting place for their remains and a birthplace for their rediscovery. The opening chapter of their story is filled with wonder, but also humility. We realize how fragile our knowledge is, how dependent it is on accidents of preservation and discovery. If that bone had crumbled, if it had never been found, if no scientist had thought to test its DNA, the Denisovans would still be unknown. How many others, then, remain hidden? How many species of human lived and vanished, their bones lost, their names unspoken? The Denisovans remind us that the human story is unfinished, that the earth still holds surprises, that every excavation might reveal not just objects, but new kinds of people. And so, as we close this opening act, we return to the mystery that lingers. The Denisovans lived, that much is clear. They spread across vast distances, from Siberia to Southeast Asia. They interbred with us, leaving genetic footprints still visible today. They adapted to extreme environments, survived in harsh climates, endured challenges we can only imagine. And yet, they vanished. Their bones are few, their artifacts scarce, their culture invisible. They stand at the edge of history, half seen, half known, their legacy both present and absent. In the glow of the fire, in the silence of the cave, in the spirals of DNA, they wait. Their story has only begun to unfold. We are drawn forward by questions, compelled by curiosity, driven by the need to know. Who were they, these mysterious humans? How did they live? How did they love? How did they die? What did they pass on to us? And what did they take with them into the dark? The answers lie ahead, in the next chapters of their story, in the science that continues to probe, hoped to reconstruct not just biology, but identity. It is in this transition, from cave to laboratory, from dust to data, that the Denisovans began to emerge from obscurity. The Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, Germany, was already a global center for the study of ancient DNA. Its researchers had pioneered techniques for extracting genetic information from remains tens of thousands of years old, a feat once thought impossible. DNA, after all, is fragile. Time breaks it down, shatters it into fragments barely longer than a few dozen letters. Heat, moisture, and microbes erase it even faster. For decades, scientists believed that DNA could not survive more than a few thousand years at most. Yet by the early 21st century, advances in sequencing technology, in contamination control, and in computational reconstruction had opened a new frontier. Suddenly, the past was no longer silent. It could be read in sequences of A, T, C, and G. The fragment from Denisova was small, but it carried within it a library of information. Scientists drilled into it with microscopic precision, extracting powder without wasting a single grain. This powder was treated with chemicals to release the DNA molecules, which were then amplified, sequenced, and compared. Each fragment of DNA was like a torn scrap of an ancient manuscript, incomplete and fragile. The task was to stitch them back together, aligning overlaps, filling gaps, constructing a genome letter by letter. It was a process both painstaking and miraculous. At first, the expectation was simple. The fragment would probably belong to a Neanderthal. After all, Neanderthals had lived in Eurasia for hundreds of thousands of years, and their remains had been found from Spain to Siberia. Denisova Cave itself had already yielded Neanderthal traces in deeper layers. To find another would be no surprise. Alternatively, the fragment might belong to a modern human, one of the early Homo sapiens who had begun spreading into Asia tens of thousands of years ago. Either way, the story seemed predictable, but when the sequences appeared on the screens, the scientists realized they had stumbled upon something different. More so than many living humans had been sequenced at that time. Ironically, the Denisovans were known not by what they looked like, but by the code of life inside their bones. They were, in a sense, the first human species discovered through genetics alone. What the genome revealed was astonishing. The Denisovans were more closely related to Neanderthals than to Homo sapiens, sharing a common ancestor with them hundreds of thousands of years ago. Yet, they were distinct, their DNA diverging in patterns that suggested long periods of isolation. Where had they lived? How far had they spread? The genome hinted at answers. By comparing Denisovan DNA with that of modern humans, scientists discovered something remarkable. Fragments of Denisovan code survive in us today. Populations in Southeast Asia, Melanesia, and Oceania carry up to 5% of their genome from Denisovan ancestors. In Tibet, certain genes linked to high-altitude adaptation, allowing people to live in thin air with less oxygen, come directly from Denisovans. Suddenly, these vanished humans were not entirely gone. They were part of us. But the genome also raised puzzles. It contained hints of interbreeding not just with humans and Neanderthals, but possibly with yet another unknown lineage, an even deeper mystery. It suggested that the Denisovans were widespread, perhaps inhabiting regions from the frigid north to tropical islands, and it suggested that their story was intertwined with ours in ways we had barely begun to comprehend. The discovery coincided with a revolution in technology. Sequencing costs were falling, methods were improving, and computational power was exploding. By the mid-2020s, researchers had completed even more detailed analyses of Denisovan DNA. The so-called genome Denisova 25, a high-coverage sequence, allowed unprecedented precision in identifying the exact contributions of Denisovans to modern populations. Combined with advances in ancient protein analysis and the recovery of DNA from unexpected sources like calcified dental plaque, scientists were building an ever-richer portrait of these people. From their genes, we could infer their skin, their hair, their eyes, their immune systems, even aspects of revealed physical traits. But fossils are rare, fragile, and scattered. DNA, however, hides in fragments of bone, in teeth, in even the smallest scrap. Where fossils leave gaps, DNA fills them with information more detailed than ever imagined. In the case of the Denisovans, DNA did not just supplement the fossil record. It created them. Without DNA, there would be no Denisovans. With it, they emerged as fully recognized members of the human family. The revelation of Denisovan DNA did more than introduce a new species. It reshaped the boundaries of what we thought possible in science. For generations, the human story was told through bones, through artifacts, through the slow accumulation of evidence dug from the earth. Fossils were static things, silent in their shape, their skulls measuring cranial capacity, their teeth showing diet, their skeletons suggesting strength or fragility. But DNA changed everything. With DNA, bones could speak, not just in whispers, but in entire narratives encoded in their spirals. The Denisovans were the proof. A tiny fragment of bone, nearly anonymous in appearance, transformed into an entire genome, a voice rising from deep time. The process itself was a triumph of perseverance. Imagine sitting in a laboratory, staring at a fragment of code appearing line by line on a computer screen. To most eyes, it is gibberish, a sequence of letters without apparent meaning. But to those who know how to read it, every letter is part of a story. A misplaced base pair here, a mutation there, a pattern of repeats, all reveal ancestry, adaptation, survival. And in the Denisovan genome, the patterns were distinct, strange, different enough to show that these people were not simply Neanderthals, not simply early Homo sapiens, but something of their own. The data pointed to a divergence hundreds of thousands of years ago, when the ancestors of Neanderthals and Denisovans split from those of modern humans. Later, the Neanderthals and Denisovans themselves divided, forming two sister species who would inhabit different parts of Eurasia. Neanderthals dominated the West, Denisovans forward through tens of thousands of years. The story grew stranger still. Within the Denisovan genome were traces of something even older, something that did not belong to humans as we knew them. Scientists called it a ghost lineage, a mysterious ancestor that had interbred with Denisovans long before their DNA mingled with ours. Who were they, these unknown ancestors? Perhaps another species of human, as yet undiscovered, whose bones have not been found. Or perhaps a relic population of a very ancient lineage, stretching back to Homo erectus or even earlier. Whatever the answer, it added another layer of depth to the story. Denisovans were not just a mystery themselves. They were connected to other mysteries, to shadows upon shadows in the human past. By the mid-2020s, new discoveries added texture to this picture. The Denisova 25 genome, sequenced with extraordinary precision, gave researchers one of the most detailed looks at any extinct human's DNA. With this genome, scientists could track exactly which pieces of Denisovan DNA remain in modern people, mapping them like trails across our chromosomes. It became possible to identify not just the fact of Denisovan ancestry, but its effects. In Tibet, one gene stood out, EPAS1, which helps regulate the body's response to low oxygen. Without it, life at high altitudes is harsh, blood thickens, and illness follows. With it, adaptation becomes possible. This gene, passed from Denisovans to Homo sapiens, allowed Tibetans to thrive on the roof of the world. Here was proof, tangible and specific, that interbreeding with Denisovans shaped the destiny of our species. Other genes pointed to immune system adaptations, to traits that helped our ancestors fight disease, survive pathogens, endure environments that might otherwise have been lethal. These contributions were not trivial. They were survival itself. And so, even in their disappearance, the Denisovans shaped the course of our story. They became part of us, invisible but enduring, their influence carried in the resilience of those who lived where they once roamed. The techniques that revealed all this were as remarkable as the results. Beyond bone, scientists what they feared, what they hoped. For that, we must wait. Perhaps for more bones. Perhaps for artifacts still hidden. Until then, the Denisovans remain a paradox. Genetically vivid, archaeologically invisible. This paradox is at the heart of their mystery. They are at once the most genetically known of extinct humans and the least physically known. We can compare their DNA with exquisite detail, yet we cannot reconstruct their faces with certainty. We can map their contributions to our immune systems and altitude adaptations, yet we do not know what tools they held in their hands, what songs they might have sung by firelight. It is a strange fate for a species, to be resurrected in code rather than in bone, to be present in data, but absent in image. And yet, in this strangeness, lies their power, for they force us to confront not just what we know, but how little we know, and how much remains to be discovered. The sequencing of Denisovan DNA did more than give us facts. It gave us perspective. It reminded us that the human story is not a straight line, but a braided river, its channels splitting and rejoining, its waters mingling in ways we are only beginning to trace. It reminded us that survival was never simple, that adaptation often came through cooperation and exchange, even across species lines. And it reminded us that we are not alone, not singular, but the product of many. In every breath we take, in every cell of our bodies, the Denisovans endure, not as ghosts, but as kin. The decoding of Denisovan DNA did not end with a single revelation. It opened a doorway, and through that doorway, an entire field of discovery surged forward. Each year brought new methods, sharper insights, deeper questions. Scientists began to treat DNA not just as a tool of biology, but as a kind of time machine, one that could carry us into moments long gone. And in that journey, the Denisovans became central figures, their genome serving as a compass for understanding the complexity of our past. In 2024, researchers announced the completion of one of the most detailed Denisovan genomes ever sequenced, sometimes called Denisova 25. It encounters, migrations, and interbreeding across tens of thousands of years. In the great journey of humanity across the globe, Denisovans had not been bystanders. They had been participants, shaping the story in ways we continue to uncover. One of the most striking discoveries involved altitude. The high mountains of Tibet are among the most unforgiving places on Earth. At altitudes above 4,000 meters, oxygen is scarce, the air thin, the nights bitterly cold. For most humans, survival at such heights is a struggle. Yet Tibetan populations thrive there, their bodies adapted to the conditions in ways that seem almost miraculous. The secret, scientists discovered, lay in a gene called EPAS1. This gene regulates the body's production of hemoglobin, the protein that carries oxygen in the blood. In most people, low oxygen levels trigger the body to produce more hemoglobin, thickening the blood and leading to illness at high altitudes. But in Tibetans, EPAS1 works differently, allowing them to function without overproducing hemoglobin. The result is resilience in the thin air. And the origin of this adaptation? Denisovans. This was not mere theory. It was clear evidence that interbreeding with Denisovans had given modern humans the tools to survive in one of the harshest environments on the planet. Without them, perhaps Tibet would never have been permanently settled. Without them, entire cultures might not exist today. It is a reminder that our survival was not solely our own achievement, but the result of exchanges with cousins now lost. In this way, Denisovans live on not only in our genes, but in the landscapes and societies their adaptations made possible. Other genetic contributions painted a similar picture. Variants linked to immune system function, to resistance against diseases, to the regulation of metabolism, all bore the signature of Denisovan ancestry. Each one was like a gift passed down through generations, forged in the crucible of environments that demanded strength, resilience, and adaptation. The Denisovans endured extremes, and in enduring, they bequeathed to us fragments of their survival. But not only in bone, but in the very dust of Denisova Cave, proof that their presence there had been deep and lasting. Even in the absence of skeletons, the cave itself became a witness, its soil a recorder of species that had once called it home. Equally surprising was the analysis of ancient dental plaque. Fossilized tartar on teeth preserved not only bacterial DNA but also traces of food, pathogens, and environmental particles. From the plaque of Neanderthals and Denisovans, scientists began to reconstruct diets and health, discovering plants they had eaten, diseases they had carried, even medicines they might have used. Imagine such detail. From the hardened residue on a tooth, a glimpse into daily life tens of thousands of years ago. Here, too, Denisovans were no longer abstractions. They were eaters, healers, strugglers against disease. Humans engaged in the same fight for survival we know so well. Meanwhile, discoveries in Asia added fuel to the fire. In 2021, the Harbin skull, also known as Dragon Man, was described from northeast China. Its massive cranium, broad face, and unique features sparked debate. Was it Homo sapiens, Homo erectus, or something else? Some researchers suggested it could be closely related to Denisovans, perhaps even a Denisovan specimen itself. Though DNA has not yet confirmed the link, the possibility tantalizes. If true, it would give Denisovans not just genetic presence, but a face, a skull, a glimpse of what they might have looked like. Until that day, they remain faceless, known more through sequences than features. But the Harbin skull reminds us that bones still have secrets to tell, and the bridge between DNA and fossil may one day be crossed. By 2025, the study of ancient DNA had become so advanced that entire populations of the past could be reconstructed genetically. The Denisovans, once invisible, were now mapped across time and space. We could trace their interbreeding with Neanderthals, their mixing with Homo sapiens, their influence on modern populations. And yet, the more we learned, the stranger the picture became. The Denisovans were not a single uniform group. Evidence suggested that asks us to picture not a shadowy single species, but a multitude of lives scattered across landscapes, enduring, adapting, mingling, vanishing. They remain mysterious, but the mystery is richer now, filled with detail, with evidence, with possibility. And at the heart of it all is DNA, the fragile spiral that survived the ages, carrying voices we can no longer hear, but can still, in a sense, read. The Denisovan genome was more than a scientific achievement. It was a revelation about what it means to be human. For centuries, we believed that our uniqueness was absolute, that Homo sapiens stood alone as the sole inheritor of the human lineage. The discovery of Neanderthals had already challenged that view, reminding us that others once shared the earth. But Neanderthals, with their skeletal remains, their stone tools, their burial practices, felt tangible, almost familiar. Denisovans were different. They arrived not as bones but as code, not as faces but as fragments of data. In this way, they forced us to confront the idea that identity itself could be preserved invisibly, carried in letters strung across chromosomes. The decoding of Denisovan DNA revealed not only their existence but their entanglement with ours. To find their sequences in modern populations was to discover that the boundaries between species were porous, that the human story was not isolation, but interconnection. The realization was unsettling, for it suggested that who we are is not solely the product of Homo sapiens, but of a tapestry woven from encounters with others. Within us live the remnants of Neanderthals, of Denisovans, and perhaps of even older lineages. Our identity is not pure, but shared, a mosaic of past unions and struggles. This shared identity takes on concrete form in the adaptations we inherited. Genes for altitude, genes for immunity, genes for metabolism, all carry signatures of Denisovan ancestry. These are not abstract concepts. They shape lives today. They determine who can thrive in high mountains, who can resist certain diseases, who can adapt to absence has fueled debates among scientists. Some argue that the Denisovans may have been culturally similar to Neanderthals, who left evidence of art, ornaments, and burials. Others suggest they may have developed their own traditions, perhaps lost because they left so few sites behind. Without more evidence, we can only speculate. But speculation is not emptiness. It is imagination, guided by science, filling in the outlines with possibilities. And those possibilities remind us that humanity has always been more diverse, more creative, more complex than any simple narrative allows. The techniques of decoding ancient DNA continue to evolve, and with them, the Denisovans may yet become clearer. Researchers now recover DNA not only from bones but from sediments, from tools, from residues so minute that earlier generations would have dismissed them as meaningless dust. Each new method expands the possibilities, offering the chance that Denisovan DNA might be found in places far from Siberia, in caves across Asia, in unexpected corners of the world. Each discovery adds a new piece to the puzzle, transforming the shadow into something closer to form. But even as the shadow sharpens, it remains incomplete. For every sequence recovered, there are questions that cannot yet be answered. Where exactly did the Denisovans live? How many were there? Did they vanish suddenly or slowly blend into other populations? Did they leave art we have not found, words we cannot recover, monuments that have long since eroded? These questions linger, haunting the story, reminding us that knowledge is always partial, always unfolding. The period between 2024 and 2025 brought new breakthroughs that kept the Denisovans at the forefront of science. The genome Denisova 25 provided the highest resolution view yet, but other studies added layers of context. Proteomic analysis, the study of ancient proteins, allowed scientists to extract information even when DNA was too degraded. Proteins, more durable than DNA, revealed aspects of physiology and diet, complementing the genetic record. Meanwhile, new computational models simulated migrations and interbreeding events, showing how Denisovans might have. Decoding of Denisovan DNA is not just about science. It is about imagination. It asks us to picture a world in which humanity was never alone, in which multiple species of humans walked side by side, sometimes in conflict, sometimes in cooperation, sometimes in love. It asks us to see ourselves not as the inevitable result of a straight line, but as the outcome of countless intersections, encounters, and exchanges. It asks us to recognize that the very notion of human is broader, richer, more inclusive than we once believed. In the glow of a documentary, the camera lingers on sequences of DNA scrolling across a screen, letters cascading in endless patterns. The narrator's voice reminds us that these letters are not just data, they are lives. They are the Denisovans, resurrected not in body but in code, speaking across time in a language of molecules. They tell us that they were here, that they mattered, that they are part of us. And they remind us that the story is unfinished, that much remains hidden, that every discovery is both an answer and a question. The bone fragment from Denisova Cave was small, almost invisible. Yet from it, entire worlds have unfolded. From it, we have glimpsed the complexity of our ancestry, the richness of our past, the entanglement of species in the making of humanity. From it, we have learned that our survival is not ours alone, but a shared inheritance, shaped by cousins now gone. And from it, we have realized that the boundaries of human identity are far wider than we once imagined. The decoding of Denisovan DNA is a triumph, but it is also an invitation. It invites us to keep searching, to keep asking, to keep listening for the voices of those who lived before. It invites us to imagine a past filled with diversity, with connection, with mystery. And it invites us to recognize that within us, in every cell, those voices still whisper. They whisper of survival, of adaptation, of resilience. They whisper of Denisovans. In the end, the greatest achievement of decoding Denisovan DNA was not only the discovery of a new species, but the transformation from oblivion. Yet for all we know, so much remains uncertain. What did the Denisovans look like? Were they taller or shorter than us, broader or leaner, dark or light of skin? Did they make art, leave symbols, create ornaments like the Neanderthals? Did they bury their dead with care or leave them to the elements? Did they speak a language, sing songs, tell stories around the fire? The genome cannot answer these questions. It gives us their biology, but not their culture. And so, they remain mysterious, a people vivid in code, but faceless in life. The Harbin skull in China hints at what they might have looked like, with its massive cranium and broad features. But even that remains contested. Some scientists argue it belongs to Denisovans, others disagree. Until DNA confirms the link, the Denisovans remain without a face. We know them intimately in their genes, but we cannot yet meet their gaze. This absence makes them haunting. They are kin we recognize but cannot picture, ancestors whose voices echo but whose features are blurred. The implications extend beyond curiosity. The Denisovans challenge how we define human. If we define it biologically, they qualify, with genomes so close to ours that interbreeding was possible and fruitful. If we define it culturally, we cannot yet say, for their culture is hidden. If we define it historically, they are part of our story, their DNA woven into ours. Perhaps then, humanity is not a species but a network, a continuum, a web of beings who lived, mingled, and disappeared, leaving legacies behind. This view reshapes not only science but imagination. When we picture the past now, we must picture it filled with diversity. The world of 50,000 years ago was not empty. It was populated by Neanderthals in the west, Denisovans in the east, Homo sapiens spreading outward, and perhaps other species we have yet to discover. The earth was crowded with cousins, each adapting, surviving, struggling. And in that crowd, we were not the inevitable victors, but one branch among many. Our survival was never guaranteed, our beginning. And so, as part 2 of this story closes, we return to the lab where it all began. Imagine the scientists in Leipzig staring at sequences on their screens, realizing for the first time what they had found. Imagine their disbelief, their excitement, their awe. They were not just reading data. They were reading lives, the lives of people who had walked the earth tens of thousands of years before, whose bones lay forgotten in a Siberian cave, whose genes endured in us. It was not simply science. It was communion across time. The camera might show the contrast, the sterile glow of the laboratory, machines humming, computers whirring, DNA scrolling across a monitor. Then it cuts to the darkness of Denisova Cave, snow falling outside, silence pressing in. 2 worlds, separated by tens of thousands of years, connected by a single fragment of bone. The past and the present, the cave and the lab, the ancient and the modern, bound together by the fragile spiral of DNA. The Denisovans emerge from that spiral, no longer invisible, no longer forgotten. They stand beside Neanderthals and Homo sapiens as fellow humans, part of the great experiment of life, part of the tangled story of survival. We may not know their faces, but we know their presence. We may not hear their voices, but we hear their echoes. We may not walk beside them, but we carry them within us. And so, The decoding of Denisovan DNA is not the end of their story, but the beginning of ours. It reminds us that to be human is to be connected, to be part of a lineage that is broader and deeper than we imagined. It reminds us that the past is not dead but living, carried in our blood, shaping our lives. And it reminds us that the future of discovery is open, waiting, full of secrets yet to be revealed. As the narration fades, the music swells, and the camera lingers once more on the cave. Snow falls quietly at the entrance. Darkness stretches inside. Somewhere within that darkness, more bones may lie hidden, more fragments waiting, more voices. While Neanderthals settled in Europe and Western Asia, the Denisovans ranged further east. They claimed the mountains of Siberia, the plateaus of Tibet, the forests of Southeast Asia, perhaps even the islands that stretch toward Australia. Their domain was vast, their adaptability remarkable. Few species of human have ever spanned such extremes. From icy tundras where mammoths roamed to humid jungles alive with insects and rain, Denisovans endured. To imagine their life in Siberia is to imagine struggle. Winters were long, dark, and merciless. Temperatures plummeted, food grew scarce, predators lurked. To survive, Denisovans would have needed fire, clothing, shelter. Archaeological evidence from Denisova Cave shows traces of hearths, blackened patches where wood once burned, casting warmth and light into the darkness. Around these fires, families must have gathered, huddled against the cold, sharing food and stories. Their clothing, likely made from animal hides, would have been essential, stitched or tied together with bone needles or sinew. Without such ingenuity, no human could have endured the Siberian frost. Hunting was central to their survival. The bones of animals found in Denisova Cave tell us they pursued a wide range of prey: bison, deer, wild horses, even mammoths. To hunt such creatures required tools, cooperation, strategy. Stone flakes, carefully knapped, have been recovered from the cave, their sharp edges capable of cutting hide and meat. Spears, tipped with stone or bone, would have been thrust or thrown in coordinated hunts. In the firelight, after the kill, they would strip meat from bone, roast it over flames, share it among the group. This was life at its most elemental. Predator and prey, fire and frost, survival and death. Yet Denisovans were not confined to the north. Evidence suggests their presence reached as far as the Tibetan Plateau, a land of mountains and thin air. Here, their genetic legacy tells us they carried adaptations to survive where others could not. Imagine them moving through valleys at altitudes of 4,000 meters, lungs drawing in air scarce in oxygen, only about survival, but about community. A single individual cannot endure the challenges of the Ice Age. Families, bands, tribes, these were the units of life. Around the fire, roles would have been divided. Hunters returned with meat, gatherers with plants, elders with wisdom, children with curiosity. The young learned by watching, imitating, practicing. Skills were passed down not through books but through hands, through repetition, through tradition. In this way, knowledge endured across generations. At night, in the cave, as flames crackled and shadows danced, what did they feel? Did they gaze into the fire and wonder about the world beyond? Did they fear the predators that howled in the distance? Did they tell stories to their children, weaving myths from stars and beasts and memories? We cannot know for certain. But if they were anything like us, then their lives were filled not just with struggle, but with meaning. For even in the harshest conditions, humans seek not only to live, but to understand. The tools they left behind suggest intelligence, foresight, creativity. Stone flakes shaped with care, bone needles carved with precision. These are not the products of instinct, but of thought. To shape a tool is to imagine its purpose, to plan ahead, to anticipate need. This is the essence of humanity, and in the Denisovans, it was alive. They were not brutes stumbling through darkness. They were thinkers, planners, craftsmen. They carried within them the same spark that burns in us, the drive to create, to adapt, to endure. The world they inhabited was one of danger, but also of wonder. Mammoths roamed the plains, vast and majestic. Saber-toothed cats stalked the shadows, predators as terrifying as any myth. Rivers swelled with salmon, forests rustled with game, skies filled with migrating birds. The Denisovans lived in a world both hostile and abundant, a world that demanded skill but rewarded resilience. Their survival was not luck. It was earned, day after day, season after season, through effort and ingenuity. And so, when we speak of Denisovan life, we must not picture shows us that our struggles are not new, that survival has always required courage, cooperation, imagination. It shows us that our ancestors were not alone, but shared their journey with others. And it shows us that even those who vanish are never truly gone, for their legacy persists, written in the blood of their descendants, in the stories we tell, in the imaginations they inspire. To imagine the life of the Denisovans, we must first imagine the world they inhabited, not as a static backdrop, but as a living, breathing stage. The Altai mountains of Siberia were harsh, but they were not barren. Forests stretched across the slopes, rivers cut deep valleys, plains opened into horizons where herds of grazing animals moved like tides. The Denisovans walked this world with the knowledge that every day was a contest between endurance and extinction. They were not at the top of the food chain, not in a land where cave lions, wolves, and bears prowled. They survived because they learned, because they adapted, because they stood together. Their tools were their lifeline. Archaeologists have uncovered stone implements from Denisova Cave, flakes and blades carefully shaped from local rock. These were not random breaks, but deliberate designs, crafted by hands that understood the properties of stone. A core was struck with precision, flakes chipped away until a sharp edge emerged. With such tools, hides could be cut, meat stripped, wood shaped. These tools were extensions of thought, externalized intelligence. To carry a blade was to carry the memory of how it was made and the intention of what it could do. Bone, too, was shaped into instruments of survival. Needles with drilled eyes suggest that the Denisovans sewed hides into clothing, a vital adaptation in the freezing north. A needle is not just a tool, it is a symbol of foresight. To stitch hides is to prepare for winter, to shield the body against a world that kills the unprepared. The presence of such needles in Denisova Cave tells us that they were not merely scraping by. They were planning ahead, thinking beyond the immediate, investing time in the future. This is what cooperation and courage. To face such creatures was to face death itself, tusks and horns capable of shattering bone, hooves that could crush. Yet the reward was immense. Thousands of pounds of meat, fat to fuel fires, hides to line shelters. Did the Denisovans drive mammoths into traps? Did they ambush bison near rivers? We cannot be certain, but the bones found in their caves suggest that they attempted and sometimes succeeded in such feats. To do so demanded not only strength but communication, planning, and trust among hunters. These were not solitary beings. They were members of groups that lived and died together. Shelter was essential, particularly in Siberia. The cave itself provided refuge, but life was not confined within stone walls. Outside, temporary camps would have been erected as hunters followed herds across the land. Simple frames of wood and bone covered in hides could provide protection from wind and snow. Fires burned at the center, smoke rising through holes, warmth radiating outward. Around these fires, life unfolded, meals shared, tools made, children taught. The flickering flames were not just heat but community, binding individuals into something larger, sustaining them through the darkness of winter nights. And what of the children? In every society, the young are both burden and hope. Denisovan children would have been cared for, taught by watching, by imitation, by participation. A child might begin by carrying wood, by gathering stones, by helping scrape hides. Slowly, skills would be passed down: how to strike stone, how to tie sinew, how to aim a spear. Each mistake was a lesson, each success a victory. Childhood was not prolonged. In a harsh world, children grew into adults quickly, but in that process, they carried forward the knowledge that ensured survival. The environment shaped everything. In the north, the seasons dictated rhythm. Winters were long, food scarce, survival precarious. Summers were brief but abundant, rivers teeming with fish, forests alive with game, plants sprouting in cannot yet prove it. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Until more is found, the possibility lingers that Denisovans, too, had culture, had ritual, had beauty. Their life was fragile, but it was full. Each day was shaped by the balance between risk and reward, between hunger and satiety, between cold and warmth. Illness, injury, predators, all could end life quickly. But community offered resilience. To live among others meant to be cared for, to be protected, to be remembered. In this, Denisovans were human in the deepest sense. Social beings, defined not only by survival, but by the bonds that made survival possible. And so, when we reconstruct their life, we must not imagine shadows moving wordlessly through forests. We must imagine people, real, breathing, feeling, who endured the same cold, the same fear, the same need for love and belonging that we know today. The Denisovans were not strangers. They were kin. Their lives, though distant, mirror our own, reminding us that across the gulf of tens of thousands of years, the essence of being human remains the same. When we step back from the cave in Siberia and follow the trail of Denisovan DNA across the map, we begin to see a species not confined to one place but spread across an immense range. Unlike Neanderthals, who concentrated largely in Europe and Western Asia, Denisovans extended their reach far into the east, across mountains, plateaus, jungles, and seas. Their legacy in modern genomes reveals their footprint from Tibet to Papua New Guinea, from the steppes of Central Asia to the islands scattered across Oceania. Few humans, past or present, have demonstrated such breadth of adaptation. Their migration was not a single journey, but a process stretched over millennia. As climates shifted and glaciers advanced or retreated, populations of Denisovans followed herds, sought new resources, and adapted to landscapes that would have broken weaker species. Some groups remained in the cold north, where mammoths and bison provided sustenance. Others pushed southward, crossing rivers swollen with monsoon rains. To survive here required skills different from those of the north. Hunting large herd animals gave way to stalking smaller prey in forests, fishing in rivers, gathering plants and fruits. Fire was still essential, but the challenges of disease, parasites, and heat demanded other strategies. That Denisovans adapted to such a world testifies to their flexibility, their capacity to thrive wherever they went. And then there are the islands. Genetic evidence indicates that Denisovan ancestry is highest among peoples of Papua New Guinea, Melanesia, and indigenous Australians. This suggests that Denisovans, or populations closely related to them, reached the islands of Southeast Asia and possibly beyond. If true, then they must have crossed water, whether by rafts, simple boats, or natural land bridges exposed during ice ages. The thought of Denisovans gazing across a strait, seeing another island on the horizon and deciding to cross, fills us with awe. It suggests curiosity, daring, and ingenuity. It reminds us that exploration did not begin with us, but with cousins long forgotten. Imagine a small group of Denisovans standing on a beach in what is now Indonesia. The tide recedes, exposing land bridges that stretch further than usual. They follow the path, moving from island to island, hunting, gathering, surviving. At some point, the water is too wide. They cut wood, lash logs together, and push off, paddling across currents under a sky filled with stars. The journey is dangerous, but the reward is new land, new resources, new possibilities. Whether they succeeded often or only rarely, the traces of their DNA in island populations prove that at least some made it through. In this way, Denisovans were not only survivors, but explorers. Their adaptability across environments raises another question. What did they look like? Were Denisovans in the tropics physically different from those in the north? Did their features change to suit the climates they inhabited? The genome suggests variation, with multiple Denisovan populations diverging from one another. This means that Denisovans were not a monolithic group, but a species with regional blending lineages, creating new possibilities. Denisovans were not isolated wanderers. They were part of a web of connections that spanned continents. The adaptability of Denisovans challenges our assumptions about what it means to survive. It is easy to think of human evolution as a ladder, each step leading inexorably toward us. But Denisovans remind us that survival is not linear. It is branching, diverse, filled with experiments. They succeeded in places we might not. They endured climates that tested the limits of life. They spread further than many of their contemporaries. And yet, they vanished. Their adaptability was great, but it was not enough. Their disappearance remains a mystery, one we will explore later. For now, what matters is that they lived, that they thrived, that they left behind a record not in monuments, but in genes. In the imagination of the documentary, we can see their migrations played out on a map. Arrows stretch from Siberia southward, across Asia, into forests, over mountains, toward islands. Each arrow represents generations moving, seeking, surviving. Each arrow carries stories of births, deaths, hunts, journeys. And though we cannot follow every path, the traces in modern DNA confirm that the arrows were real. Denisovans were not shadows confined to one cave. They were travelers, settlers, pioneers. To picture their life is to picture resilience. In Siberia, they wrapped themselves in hides, huddled against the cold. In Tibet, they breathed thin air, their blood carrying adaptations that defied altitude. In the tropics, they endured heat and disease, feeding from rivers and forests. On islands, they braved waters, pushed boundaries, expanded horizons. In all these places, they lived as humans live, building fires, shaping tools, raising children, seeking food, forming bonds. Their lives were difficult, but they were full. And so, when we speak of Denisovan migration, we speak not only of movement, but of identity. They were a species without borders, defined not by one environment, but by many. They were not static, but dynamic, not confined, but expanded. Storytelling has yet been found. It is almost impossible to imagine them without it. To be human is to tell stories, and Denisovans were human too. Picture a winter night in Denisova Cave. Snow drifts outside, muffling the world in silence. Within, a fire crackles, its smoke spiraling toward the ceiling. A group gathers close, hides wrapped tightly around shoulders, children pressed against parents. The hunters have returned, bringing meat from the day's chase. The firelight flickers across faces, revealing worry, relief, fatigue, pride. As the meal is shared, voices murmur. Perhaps an elder recounts an earlier hunt, gesturing with hands to describe the movements of reindeer across the snow. Perhaps a mother soothes a child with rhythm, humming a lullaby, the first seeds of music. Perhaps someone laughs, and the laughter echoes against stone, breaking the silence of the Ice Age night. Such scenes cannot be proven, yet they echo across humanity. Wherever people have lived, fire has bound them together. Neanderthals buried their dead. Modern humans painted cave walls. Are we to believe Denisovans sat only in silence? More likely, they too had rituals, songs, games, gestures. Perhaps they carved symbols into wood that has since rotted away, or strung beads from bone and shell now lost to time. Perhaps they painted themselves with ochre, marking identity, clan, or role. The absence of artifacts does not mean absence of meaning. It means only that the fragile materials of their culture have not endured. The Denisovans' world demanded cooperation. To hunt large animals, to build shelters, to care for children, required groups to act as one. Such cooperation is rarely sustained by force alone. It requires trust, communication, shared values. These are the seeds of culture. A Denisovan child learned not just how to knap stone or sew hides, but when to trust, when to share, when to belong. Culture is not only in ornaments or art, it is in the invisible bonds that hold a group together, in the unspoken rules that guide action. The Denisovans, like us, must have ancestry. From this, we can infer unions, relationships, even love. A Denisovan and a Neanderthal might have met at a hunting ground, exchanged gestures, shared fire, and formed a bond. A Denisovan and an early Homo sapiens might have lived together in the same valley, raising children whose DNA would endure into modern times. Such unions were not abstractions. They were real lives, real emotions, real families. In this way, Denisovans were not only our cousins genetically, but our kin emotionally. Grief, too, must have been part of their lives. In a harsh world, death was never far. A hunter struck down by a mammoth's tusk, a child taken by illness, an elder lost to the cold. Did the Denisovans mourn? Did they sit in silence by the fire, remembering those who were gone? Did they bury their dead, as Neanderthals sometimes did? Or did they leave them to the elements, acknowledging the cycle of life and death? Archaeology has not answered this, but bones found in Denisova Cave suggest intentional placement, hints of patterns that could reflect ritual. If so, then grief was given form, loss was marked, memory preserved. The possibility of music is another mystery. Music leaves few traces, yet it is one of humanity's oldest companions. Neanderthals fashioned flutes from bird bones. Could Denisovans have done the same? A simple rhythm, struck on stone, clapped with hands, hummed in voices, could fill the silence of night. Music unites, soothes, inspires. It is hard to imagine that Denisovans lived without it. Perhaps in the long winters they sang together, their voices rising into the dark, weaving harmony against loneliness. Perhaps children clapped along, laughing, while elders swayed in rhythm. Music is memory in sound, and the Denisovans may have carried it as surely as we do. Even play must have had its place. Children cannot be children without play. In the safety of caves or meadows, Denisovan children may have chased each other, thrown small stones, mimicked the actions of hunters, pretended at skills they would one day master. In their laughter and gay, their lives. They may be gone, but their culture, though unseen, resonates in us. For to be human is to be more than survival. It is to create meaning. The Denisovans, in their silence, remind us of that truth. As the sun sank behind the horizon and the icy winds swept through the valleys, the Denisovan world transformed. Day belonged to the hunt, to gathering, to the struggles of survival. Night belonged to reflection, to rest, to the fragile peace of community. It is in these hours, when the fire crackled against the dark, that we come closest to imagining their inner lives. For it is in the quiet moments, when survival is briefly assured, that humanity reveals itself most clearly. The cave was a shelter, but it was also a stage. Firelight painted shifting patterns on the walls, illuminating faces one moment and casting them into shadow the next. The smell of smoke mingled with the scent of roasting meat, with the musk of hides, with the faint traces of earth and stone. Children huddled close, drifting toward sleep, their small breaths rising and falling in rhythm. Elders murmured softly. Elders murmured softly, passing knowledge to the young, not in lectures but in stories. Perhaps they pointed to the stars outside, visible through the cave's opening, and spoke of spirits, of hunters in the sky, of cycles that governed the land. Perhaps they warned of predators, or told of ancestors, or whispered myths now lost to time. In this way, memory endured. The soundscape of a Denisovan night was not silent. Outside, wolves howled, their cries echoing across mountains. The wind whistled through trees, bending branches, scattering snow. Inside, the fire popped and hissed, embers shifting, sparks rising like fleeting stars. Voices mingled with these sounds, sometimes low and serious, sometimes light with laughter. Human voices are not only functional, They carry emotion, music, rhythm. The Denisovans must have felt this too. Whether they spoke a language we could recognize or something entirely their own, they surely used sound to bond. A union that brought forth children, these were the quiet forces that sustained life. The Denisovans interbred with Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, proof that affection, desire, and family crossed species boundaries. In these unions, genetics mingled, but so too did lives, emotions, hopes. To imagine Denisovans without love would be to strip them of humanity, and humanity, in all its forms, cannot exist without it. As the fire dimmed, dreams would come. The Denisovans, like us, must have dreamed, their minds weaving images from memory, from fear, from longing. Did they dream of the hunt, of predators, of ancestors? Did they see visions of the aurora that shimmered across their night skies, green and violet ribbons flowing in silence above the mountains? Dreams are unrecorded, yet they are among the most ancient experiences of humanity. In their dreams, perhaps, Denisovans glimpsed the same mysteries that haunt us still. Life, death, meaning, the vastness of the world. The bedtime atmosphere was not free from danger. A sudden noise outside could send hearts racing, a predator sniffing at the cave's edge, a storm howling louder, a branch cracking under snow. Each sound carried risk. The fire, carefully tended, was both shield and signal, a beacon of life but also a marker of presence. The Denisovans knew they were never entirely safe. Safety was an illusion, fragile and temporary. Yet in those hours of rest, they built something stronger than safety: resilience. By gathering, by comforting one another, by sharing warmth and story, they created continuity. The next day might bring peril, but tonight they had each other. The rhythms of their lives mirrored the rhythms of the natural world. Seasons dictated movement, food dictated labor, danger dictated vigilance. But through it all, there was constancy. The fire, the group, the night. It is in this constancy that culture grows. Every repetition of sitting around the fire, every passing of knowledge, every song sung or story told, reinforced identity. The Denis predators and storms, but inside, the cave held warmth, safety, and continuity. This was the world of the Denisovans, repeated night after night, year after year, generation after generation. And though their culture has left us no paintings, no sculptures, no monuments, it has left us something greater: presence. Their DNA lives on in us. Their adaptations sustain us. Their resilience inspires us. The bedtime moments we imagine for them, the fire, the song, the story, the dream, are also our moments. They connect us across the gulf of time, reminding us that humanity is not divided by species but united by experience. The Denisovans are mysterious, but they are not strangers. They are family, gathered around the same fire of existence. Their voices carried to us across millennia. The camera fades from the cave, the fire dimming to embers, the snow falling steadily outside. The narrator's voice lowers, soft and reflective. In the silence of the night, they endured. In the warmth of fire, they found each other. And though their names are lost, their lives still burn within us. The Denisovans lived, They dreamed. And in their dreaming, they became part of us, forever. The Denisovans were not alone. For much of human history, the world was shared. On the plains of Africa, in the forests of Europe, in the valleys of Asia, multiple species of human walked at the same time. Neanderthals thrived in the West, Homo sapiens spread outward from Africa, and Denisovans held vast territories across the East. These worlds did not remain separate. Again and again, they overlapped, collided, and mingled. The story of humanity is not one of isolation, but of interaction. When modern humans first stepped into Eurasia, they were not entering an empty land. They were entering a continent already claimed by others. Neanderthals had lived there for hundreds of thousands of years, perfectly adapted to the cold and the hunt. Denisovans, too, had staked their claim, spread existence changes how we see the past. No longer can we imagine species living in strict separation, hostile and unyielding. They met, they mingled, they bonded. The girl herself may have lived with one group or between them, carrying in her body the legacy of two lineages. Did she look different from her peers? Did she feel torn between identities? Or was she embraced by both? We cannot know. But in her, we glimpse a past where the boundaries of species were blurred, where humanity was not one thing, but many things together. Nor was she unique. The Denisovan genome carries traces of Neanderthal ancestry, showing that interbreeding was not rare but recurring. Likewise, Neanderthal genomes carry fragments of Denisovan DNA. Across time and place, their paths crossed, and in those crossings, their futures intertwined. These unions may have been occasional, but their legacy endures, written into the genomes we study today. They remind us that species were not rigid categories, but living populations, meeting, mingling, adapting. With Homo sapiens, the story is just as rich. When modern humans spread into Asia, they encountered Denisovans again and again. Genetic evidence shows that these encounters left lasting marks. Today, populations in Melanesia, Papua New Guinea, and parts of Southeast Asia carry up to 5% Denisovan DNA. In Tibet, Denisovan genes allow people to breathe more easily at high altitude. In Indonesia and the Philippines, traces of Denisovan ancestry remain strong. These are not abstract statistics. They are living legacies, shaping the bodies and lives of millions today. What did these encounters look like? We can imagine them at river crossings, where groups of modern humans met Denisovans face to face. Perhaps there was initial tension, weapons gripped, eyes wary. But curiosity too must have played a role. Hands gestured, food exchanged, bonds formed. Some encounters may have ended in violence, others in friendship, still others in love. The diversity of human experience allows for all of these. What matters is that they happened often enough to leave DNA that still endures. These interactions were not equal in all places. Isolated, they were nodes in a network of humanity, participants in a story larger than themselves. When we consider their interactions, we must also consider their emotions. Interbreeding is not merely biology. It is life, lived in relationships, in unions that brought forth children. To imagine these unions is to imagine affection, attraction, care. It is also to imagine conflict, tension, perhaps coercion. Humanity has always been complex, and the Denisovans remind us of this. But whatever the circumstances, the outcome is undeniable. They became part of us. Their blood runs in ours. Their genes shape our survival. Their presence lingers in our breath. The legacy of these encounters is profound. Without Denisovan DNA, Tibet might never have been settled. Without Denisovan DNA, immune systems in Asia and Oceania might have been less resilient. Without Denisovan DNA, our species might not be what it is today. They vanished, but not completely. In us, they endure. Their interactions with others were not the end of their story, but its continuation, woven into the fabric of our identity. And so, when we think of Denisovans, we must not think of them as vanished strangers. We must think of them as family. Cousins who once walked beside us, who met us in forests and valleys, who shared fire and love, who gave us gifts of survival that still matter. They are not gone. They are here, in our DNA, in our lungs, in our blood. The interbreeding that once blurred the boundaries of species has bound us together forever. The most astonishing part of Denisovan interaction with other humans is not simply that it happened, but that its echoes still shape us today. Unlike many ancient encounters that vanish without a trace, the Denisovans left behind genetic fingerprints that remain vivid in modern populations. These fragments of DNA are not idle remnants. They are active, living parts of our biology, influencing how we breathe, how we fight disease, how we endure environments that would otherwise defeat us. Nowhere is this clearer than in the mountains of Tibet. At altitudes above 4,000 meters, oxygen levels existed. A people's very existence is tied to a genetic inheritance from a species long vanished. In this way, Denisovans live on not only in bodies but in cultures, in ways of life that depend on the adaptations they passed to us. Immune systems also carry their signature. When humans spread into new environments, they faced pathogens unlike those in Africa. Viruses, bacteria, parasites, all posed threats that could devastate populations without protection. The Denisovans, already adapted to Asia, carried genes that helped them resist such dangers. Through interbreeding, these genes entered Homo sapiens, giving them a survival advantage. Today, certain immune system genes in Asian and Oceanian populations trace back to Denisovan ancestry. They influence how bodies respond to infection, how inflammation is regulated, how defenses are mounted. Once again, the Denisovans whisper through our blood, guiding our resilience against unseen enemies. Even metabolism bears their mark. In populations with Denisovan ancestry, variations in genes linked to fat storage and energy use suggest adaptations to harsh climates and fluctuating resources. In icy Siberia, fat meant warmth, energy meant survival. These traits passed through genes allowed bodies to endure scarcity and cold. Today, in different environments, the same genes still influence how some populations process food and store energy. Denisovans may be gone, but in kitchens, in meals, in the way our bodies respond to nutrition, their presence lingers. Perhaps most remarkable is the diversity of Denisovan contributions. Unlike Neanderthals, whose DNA is found across nearly all non-African humans, Denisovan ancestry is uneven. It is highest in Oceania, Melanesia, and parts of Southeast Asia, moderate in East Asia, and nearly absent in others. This pattern reflects history, geography, and the specific encounters that occurred tens of thousands of years ago. In some places, Denisovans merged deeply with Homo sapiens, their DNA blending into communities and persisting for millennia. In others, contact was fleeting, leaving little behind. The result is a patchwork across the globe, a genetic map that tells the story of interactions long forgotten. What does it mean that it depended on the sharing of genes, on the mingling of lineages, on the blending of differences into strength? Without them, we would be weaker. With them, we are more. This legacy forces us to reconsider what it means to be human. For centuries, we defined humanity narrowly, as Homo sapiens alone. But if Denisovan DNA shapes our bodies, our health, our survival, then are they not part of humanity too? If their genes beat in our hearts, flow in our blood, shape our breaths at high altitude, how can we deny them a place in the human family? They may have disappeared as a distinct species, but they endure as participants in the ongoing experiment of humanity. The story of interbreeding is not only one of survival, it is also one of intimacy. To pass on genes requires closeness, requires relationships, requires unions that brought forth children. These were not abstract events, but real lives lived. A Denisovan man and a Homo sapiens woman, meeting by a river, sharing food, forming a bond. A Denisovan woman and a Neanderthal man, living together in a cave, raising a hybrid child. These scenes are not written in fossils, but they are written in DNA. Every sequence we carry testifies to encounters across difference, to unions that bridged species, and in those unions, humanity expanded. The Denisovan contribution to us is not uniform. Some of their genes were beneficial, carried forward through natural selection. Others were neutral, passed along but slowly fading. Still others may have been harmful, eliminated over time. The process was not simple, but evolutionary. What survived was what worked, what gave advantage, what made life more possible. In this sense, the Denisovans continue to act in us, their genes selected and tested in environments they never lived to see. They are part of our future as much as our past. The camera of the documentary might now sweep across a map, highlighting regions of the world where Denisovan DNA persists. Bright colors light up Papua New Guinea, Melanesia, Tibet. Arrows trace ancient migrations, encounters, unions. The narrator's voice reminds us, legacy was born in encounters, real, embodied, emotional encounters between people. To imagine these meetings is to imagine the drama of humanity itself. Conflict and alliance, fear and trust, violence and tenderness. The Denisovans were not abstractions. They were neighbors, rivals, lovers, kin. Consider the first meeting of a Denisovan group with Homo sapiens, perhaps in a valley of Central Asia. The newcomers arrive, leaner, carrying tools shaped in ways unfamiliar. They move with caution, their eyes scanning the land. The Denisovans, already settled, watch from a distance. The air is tense, charged with uncertainty. Do they approach? Do they attack? Do they retreat? For hours they may linger on opposite sides of a river, studying each other across the water. A gesture breaks the silence, a hand raised, empty, open, a sign of peace, or at least curiosity. Step by step they draw closer, until the gap between them is no longer distance but possibility. Not every meeting would have been peaceful. Competition for land, for animals, for water must have sparked violence. The Denisovan band might have awoken to find strangers encroaching on their hunting grounds. Spears could be raised, stones thrown, blood spilled. For humans of any species, survival often meant defense. The bones of prehistory bear scars, fractures, evidence of conflict. We cannot doubt that Denisovans, Neanderthals, and Homo sapiens sometimes fought. Yet conflict alone does not explain the traces we carry. For children are born not from battle but from union. And so amid hostility there must also have been moments of peace. Imagine another scene. A storm raging across the plateau, winds tearing at hides, rain lashing against stone. Two groups, Denisovans and Homo sapiens take shelter in the same cave, pressed together by necessity. At first, suspicion simmers, but the fire burns for all, and hunger gnaws at all. Food is shared, perhaps reluctantly at first, then more freely. Gestures turn to words, words to laughter. A bond is formed, fragile but real. Days later, when the storm clears, they part ways. Yet not all leave. A young blend families. A child shared between groups is a child who ties fates together. These alliances could mean survival in lean times, cooperation in hunts, shared defense against predators. In this way, intimacy was not only personal but political, shaping the fates of entire communities. We must not forget the quieter moments, the small gestures that bridge divides. A piece of meat offered across a fire. A tool demonstrated, its edge tested on wood. A laugh shared over some misstep, humor breaking tension. These are the moments where trust begins, where suspicion fades, where kinship grows. They are invisible in fossils, yet they are the essence of life. Without them, there could be no interbreeding, no legacy, no shared humanity. Yet we must also acknowledge the darker side. Not every union was gentle, not every bond consensual. In a world where survival was ruthless, coercion and force cannot be ruled out. Genes do not record intent, they record only outcome. This complexity reminds us that the past was as messy as the present, filled with contradictions, with beauty and brutality intertwined. The Denisovans were human in the fullest sense, which means they carried the full spectrum of human behavior. The cultural exchanges that arose from these meetings may have been subtle but significant. From Denisovans, Homo sapiens may have learned about new hunting grounds, new plants, new techniques. From Homo sapiens, Denisovans may have learned new methods of tool-making, new ways of shaping stone. Such exchanges would not leave clear artifacts, but they would ripple through generations, influencing survival strategies. Knowledge, like genes, is passed down, blending and adapting, leaving legacies that shape the course of history. When we look at modern genomes, we see the results of these encounters. But when we imagine the past, we see the faces. A Denisovan man teaching a Homo sapiens child how to set a snare. A Homo sapiens woman sewing a hide with a Denisovan needle. A Neanderthal elder sharing fire with a Denisovan family, telling stories neither of us can ever recover. These moments, multiplied across millennia, created in their meetings, humanity expanded. In their unions, humanity was remade. In their children, the boundaries of species dissolved. The Denisovans were not only our cousins, they were part of us. And as the scene fades, the truth lingers. The Denisovans are not gone. They are present in every breath at high altitudes, in every immune response, in every chromosome that carries their signature. Their interactions with others were not moments lost in time. They were the threads from which the tapestry of humanity was woven. The proof of Denisovan interaction with Homo sapiens lies not in bones, not in tools, but in the invisible patterns of DNA. When scientists first sequenced the Denisovan genome, they did not expect to find echoes of it in us. Yet comparison after comparison revealed the truth. Modern humans, living thousands of kilometers from Siberia, carried pieces of Denisovan code in their bodies. This was more than chance. It was evidence of encounters, of unions, of children born from the mingling of species. The genome became a time machine, transporting us back to moments when lines of ancestry crossed and futures were rewritten. The trail of Denisovan DNA in modern populations is uneven, a mosaic reflecting ancient geography. In East Asians, small percentages remain, subtle traces that hint at fleeting encounters. In Melanesians and Papuans, the traces are stronger. Up to 5% of their genome comes from Denisovan ancestors. In indigenous Australians, the signature is also clear. These percentages may sound small, but in genetic terms, they are monumental. They speak to repeated contact, to interbreeding substantial enough to leave a mark still visible after tens of thousands of years. How do scientists detect such traces? The process is meticulous. They begin by mapping the Denisovan genome, letter by letter, into sequences of A, T, C, and G. They then compare it with genomes from modern populations around the world. Most of the time, the match is distant. But in certain regions, Papua New Guinea, Melanesia, Tibet, the overlaps are undeniable.
They did not simply replace others. They mingled. They blended. The story was not conquest, but entanglement. Each encounter left traces, not only in memory, but in biology. The Denisovans, Neanderthals, and Homo sapiens were not parallel lines, but intersecting branches, tangled into a single tree. We are not descendants of one species alone. We are heirs to a mosaic. One of the most striking revelations came in 2019, when scientists sequenced DNA from modern Philippine populations. Among the Ita Magbucan, an indigenous group, Denisovan ancestry was found to be the highest in the world, averaging 30 to 40% more than in Papuans. This discovery expanded the known range of Denisovans, suggesting they had been present in Southeast Asia and the islands of the Philippines. Their presence was not limited to cold Siberia or lofty Tibet. They reached the tropics, crossed seas, lived in lands now covered by rainforest and coral reef. The genetic legacy proves it. Without DNA, we might never have known. These findings highlight a paradox. Denisovan bones are almost non-existent, their tools scarce, their culture invisible. Yet their DNA is everywhere, etched into the bodies of millions. They are, in a sense, the most genetically visible but physically invisible of our relatives. They remind us that history can survive in silence, hidden in places we do not think to look, waiting for science to uncover. They remind us that presence does not require monuments, that legacy can endure even without stone or paint. Interbreeding with Denisovans was not uniform. In some regions, encounters may have been rare, a fleeting union here or there. In others, they may have been more sustained, with groups living side by side, sharing not only genes but knowledge. The genetic diversity within Denisovans themselves suggests multiple populations, some closer to Neanderthals, others more distinct. This means that humans may have interbred with different Denisovan groups in different places. The result is a patchwork of ancestry, each piece reflecting a different encounter, a different time, a different bond. This complexity has challenged scientists to rethink what a species is. If Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo sapiens could They make the Denisovans part of our story, part of our families, part of who we are. And so, the interbreeding of Denisovans and Homo sapiens is not a footnote, but a chapter of survival. It is a story of encounters across difference, of boundaries crossed, of children born from unions that reshaped the future. Without it, we would not be the same. With it, we are more complex, more resilient, more human. The Denisovans did not vanish entirely. They live in us, invisibly, intimately, eternally. The documentary might now cut to modern faces, Tibetan monks chanting at high altitude,
Papuan children running along riverbanks, Melanesian dancers painted for ceremony. Over these faces, the narrator's voice would say, "Look closely. In their blood flows the legacy of Denisovans. In their lungs, in their immune systems, in their resilience, Denisovans endure. They are not gone. They are here, alive in the bodies of millions." The Denisovans remind us that the human story is not one of purity, but of mixture. We are not the children of one lineage, but of many. We are the outcome of unions across valleys and caves, across species and time. The Denisovans are not strangers at all. They are us. When we trace the threads of Denisovan interaction with other humans, what emerges is not a story of extinction alone, but of transformation. For though their distinct identity as Denisovans has faded, their essence endures, woven into the tapestry of humanity. They remind us that survival is not always about dominance, not always about replacing others, but often about blending, borrowing, and sharing. It is through such exchanges that our species gained the strength to endure, and it is because of them that we live as we do today. The genetic gifts of Denisovans are more than curiosities. They are cornerstones of survival. High-altitude adaptation allowed life to flourish on the Tibetan plateau, where thin air would otherwise suffocate. Immune system variations bolstered resistance to pathogens, enabling survival in environments filled with dangers unseen. Metabolic traits aided in endurance, conserving energy, storing fat in
Long, we imagined it as a ladder, with Homo sapiens climbing steadily upward while others fell away. But the Denisovans remind us it was never a ladder. It was a braided river, currents splitting and rejoining, waters mingling, tributaries lost but never forgotten. We are not the pure result of a single stream. We are the confluence of many. To be human is to be mixed, to carry within us the lives of those who are gone, to embody their survival in our own. What then does it mean to say the Denisovans are extinct? Their bones may be rare, their culture invisible, their name only recently given. But extinction suggests absence, and Denisovans are not absent. They live in Tibetans breathing mountain air. They live in Papuans running jungle paths. They live in Melanesians dancing under island skies. They live in the adaptations that let our species endure across continents. They are not gone. They are within us, forever. The emotional weight of this truth is profound. To carry Denisovan DNA is to carry memory. It is to carry the voices of people who once huddled around fires, who once crossed valleys and rivers, who once sang songs now lost. It is to carry ancestors whose names we will never know, whose faces we cannot picture, but whose presence is as real as our own heartbeat. In every cell of our bodies, they endure. We are their continuation, their living legacy. And yet, the mystery remains. If they gave us so much, if they endured across such vast lands, why did they vanish? Why do we carry only fragments and not the fullness of their identity? The answer is still unknown. Climate, competition, disease, any or all could have played a role. Perhaps their numbers were always small, their groups scattered and fragile. Perhaps encounters with Homo sapiens were both a gift and a curse, blending them into us even as their distinctness faded. Whatever the cause, by 30 or 40. Wonder. For their interactions with us were not the end of their story, but the beginning of ours. Their DNA carries forward, their presence endures, their legacy continues. But the shadows remain, urging us into Part 5, into the mysteries unsolved, into the silence that swallowed them. Who were they, truly? Why did they disappear? And what secrets still lie hidden, waiting for discovery? The fire dims, the music softens, the camera fades to black. A question lingers in the air. If they are part of us, why are they gone? The Denisovans lived across vast landscapes, from the frozen steppes of Siberia to the tropical forests of Southeast Asia, from the high mountains of Tibet to the islands that dot the Pacific. They were resilient, adaptable, capable of thriving where others struggled. And yet, they vanished. Their caves grew silent, their fires burned out, their children blended into other peoples, their distinct identity lost to time. Why? This question remains one of the greatest mysteries in the story of humanity. When we ask why the Denisovans disappeared, we must first remember that disappearance is not unusual. Across the history of life, extinction has been the rule, not the exception. Species emerge, adapt, endure, and eventually fade. For every lineage that survives, countless others vanish. In this sense, the Denisovans are not unique. They are part of the endless cycle of birth and death that shapes the tree of life. Yet because they are us, because they were human, their disappearance strikes us as more personal, more haunting. Several possibilities have been proposed. Climate change is one. The Ice Age was a time of instability, of glaciers advancing and retreating, of environments shifting dramatically in only a few generations. A valley filled with herds one year might be barren the next. A forest teeming with game might vanish under ice. For small populations, such shifts could be devastating. If Denisovans were scattered in small groups, each isolated, each dependent on fragile resources, even minor changes could tip the balance. Hunger, cold, disease, any, could devastate small populations. The genome tells us Denisovans contributed to our immune systems, but it also suggests they may have been vulnerable to ours. Perhaps their disappearance was not a war, not a conquest, but an epidemic, silent, swift, unstoppable. There is also the possibility that Denisovans were always fragile. Their numbers may never have been large, their populations always thinly spread. Unlike Neanderthals, who left abundant bones and tools across Europe, Denisovans are nearly invisible in the archaeological record. This could mean their groups were few, scattered across great distances, never forming large, stable populations. If so, then extinction was always close, one harsh winter or one lost generation away. In this view, their disappearance is less a mystery than an inevitability. And yet none of these explanations fully satisfies. For Denisovans did not simply vanish without a trace. They left their genes in us, genes that endure, genes that still shape our survival. If they disappeared entirely, how do we explain their presence in millions today? The answer may be that they did not truly vanish. Instead, they merged, absorbed into the larger currents of humanity. Their bodies may have perished, their names forgotten, but their essence continues. In this sense, the Denisovans did not die out. They became us. This duality, extinct yet present, is what makes them mysterious. Unlike Neanderthals, whose bones tell us of their form, Denisovans exist mostly in code.
Unlike Homo sapiens, whose artifacts reveal culture, Denisovans are silent. We know them through absence as much as through presence. A tooth here, a bone fragment there, a genome in our blood. They are ghosts and kin, vanished yet enduring, lost yet living. It is this paradox that fascinates us, this sense that they are both gone and here, both past and present. Science continues to probe the mystery. Excavations at Denisova Cave reveal new layers, new traces, new hints of their presence. Sediment DNA uncovers their lingering molecules in soil untouched for tens of thousands of years. Comparisons of genomes reveal subgroups, suggesting even now. But even if we never find more bones, their legacy is enough to haunt us. The Denisovans force us to confront the fragility of survival, the contingency of existence. They show us that strength is not always enough, that adaptability does not guarantee endurance. They remind us that we too are vulnerable, that our survival is not assured, that extinction can come even to the most resilient. And they remind us that humanity is larger than we once believed, a family of many branches, many voices, many lives. As the documentary enters this chapter, the visuals grow darker, the tone more contemplative. Snow falls outside the cave, covering footprints. Fires fade into ash. A voice speaks softly. They lived. They adapted. They endured. And then, they were gone. The Denisovans vanished, leaving only fragments, only whispers, only traces in our blood. Why? We do not yet know. Perhaps we never will. The mystery remains, as deep as the cave that bears their name, as vast as the lands they once roamed. And in that mystery lies their power, for they remind us that history is not complete, that the past is not finished, that the story of humanity is still unfolding. When scientists consider the fate of the Denisovans, they begin with the evidence at hand: fragments of bone, sequences of DNA, traces in our genomes. From these fragments, they weave possible stories, hypotheses that attempt to explain why a species so widespread, so adaptable, should have vanished. Yet each theory, though compelling, leaves gaps. The mystery remains unresolved, as if the Denisovans resist closure even in their absence. Climate change is often the first suspect. The Ice Age was not a static freeze, but a shifting drama of advance and retreat. Glaciers pushed southward, reshaping landscapes, driving animals to migrate, redrawing the map of survival. Forests gave way to tundra, rivers dried or flooded, prey vanished from hunting grounds. For species living in small, scattered populations, such upheaval could be catastrophic. A few bad winters, a few failed hunts, carried something less tangible but equally powerful: the capacity for symbolic thought, for art, for abstraction, for language rich enough to bind large groups together. Against this, the Denisovans may have struggled. Even if they matched us in strength and adaptability, they may not have matched us in scale. Larger, better coordinated groups of Homo sapiens could outcompete smaller bands of Denisovans for resources. Slowly, inexorably, Denisovans may have been pushed into marginal lands, forced into harsher environments, dwindling until only fragments remained. And yet, the genetic record shows cooperation as well as competition. Denisovans did not vanish in isolation. They mingled, interbred, became part of us. This suggests that competition was not always conquest, that encounters were sometimes intimate rather than violent. If Denisovans were absorbed into Homo sapiens, their disappearance was not a clean replacement, but a blending, a merging of identities. In this sense, they did not lose.
they transformed. Disease also looms as a possibility. When populations separated for hundreds of thousands of years meet, their immune systems are unprepared for each other's pathogens. Homo sapiens entering Asia may have carried microbes lethal to Denisovans. A virus, a bacterium, spreading from one group to another could devastate populations already thin. Unlike predators or climate, disease leaves no direct fossil trace, but its power is undeniable. History is filled with epidemics that reshaped populations. Why not prehistory, too? Some scientists suggest the simplest explanation: numbers. Denisovans may never have been abundant. Unlike Neanderthals, who left numerous fossils across Europe, Denisovans are nearly absent from the record. This absence could mean they were always rare, scattered in small groups across vast distances. In such fragility, survival depends on luck as much as strength. A few lost generations, a few unlucky events, and extinction follows. If this was the case, then the Denisovans' disappearance was not dramatic, but quiet, a fading rather than a fall. Yet the puzzle remains. If they were so rare, how did they leave such a strong genetic mark in some populations? How did they pass on up to 5% of merged? In still others, they may have held on for millennia, isolated, until time itself erased them. This complexity is why they remain mysterious. They refuse to fit into a single explanation, a single, neat narrative. They are both gone and present, vanished and enduring, extinct and alive within us. The emotional resonance of their disappearance is strong. For when we ask why they vanished, we are really asking about ourselves. Could the same fate await us? We too live in a world of climate change, of competition, of disease. We too depend on fragile balances, on cooperation, on adaptation. The Denisovans remind us that survival is never guaranteed, that even strength and resilience can falter. They are a mirror of our own fragility, a warning from the past. The documentary might now show the passage of time in images: glaciers advancing, forests shrinking, rivers shifting. Small groups of Denisovans moving across landscapes, their numbers thinning, their fires fewer. Then, the arrival of Homo sapiens, with new tools, larger groups, spreading wider, pressing closer. Slowly, the Denisovans fade from the screen, their presence dimming until only silhouettes remain. But then, modern faces appear: Papuan, Tibetan, Melanesian, overlaid with sequences of DNA. The narrator's voice rises. They vanished, yet they endure. They are gone, yet they live in us. Their disappearance is not the end of their story, but the beginning of ours. The mystery of their extinction remains unsolved, but perhaps it is not meant to be solved fully. Perhaps the Denisovans are meant to remain elusive, half seen, half known, a reminder that the past is larger than we can grasp. In their absence, they teach us presence. In their silence, they teach us to listen. In their disappearance, they teach us how fragile and how precious survival truly is. The Denisovans exist in a paradox. On one hand, they are extinct. No living community bears their name. No caves echo with survival. Is it the persistence of a name, a culture, a distinct community? If so, the Denisovans are gone. Or is survival the endurance of influence, of legacy, of presence in others? If so, the Denisovans live. They live in Tibetans who breathe thin air with ease. They live in Papuans who inherit fragments of their resilience.
They live in the millions whose DNA carries silent echoes of ancient encounters. Perhaps survival is not absolute. Perhaps it is layered, partial, complex. The Denisovans show us that life can continue even after a species disappears, that extinction is not always final. For modern humans, this paradox is humbling. We imagine ourselves as the sole survivors, the final inheritors of the human lineage. But in truth, we are composites, mosaics built from the lives of others. We are Homo sapiens, yes, but also Neanderthal, also Denisovan, also the traces of other ghost lineages yet unnamed. Our identity is not pure, but blended. Our survival not ours alone, but shared. To know this is to see ourselves differently, not as singular but as collective, not as solitary but as family. The Denisovans remind us that our story is not one of triumph over others, but of union with them. They remind us that humanity is not defined by boundaries but by connections. In their merging with us, they expanded what it means to be human. They blur the lines between species, between survival and extinction, between past and present. They show us that life is not about purity but about mixture, not about exclusion but about inclusion. In this, they are profoundly human. This paradox also carries meaning for our future. If extinction is not always total, if identity can endure through blending, then perhaps our legacy too will be larger than we imagine. Perhaps our genes will flow into futures we cannot see, shaping lives long after our cultures fade. Perhaps we too will live on in ways invisible, written into the DNA of descendants who may not even call themselves human. The Denisovans remind us that legacy is not only monuments or memory,
Fragments of Denisovans. In their breaths, in their blood, in their resilience, Denisovans endure. They are not gone. They are alive, here, now, within us. The camera then cuts back to the empty cave in Siberia, the fire long extinguished, the silence deep. The paradox is clear. Presence and absence, together, inseparable. This paradox also raises a profound question. If Denisovans are alive in us, do they belong in the story of Homo sapiens? Or do we belong in theirs? Are we the last humans standing, or are we simply the latest expression of a lineage shaped by many? Perhaps the answer is both. We are Homo sapiens, but we are also more. We are a chorus of voices, a tapestry of ancestries, a blend of lineages. To deny the Denisovans would be to deny part of ourselves. To honor them is to honor the fullness of what it means to be human. The paradox of their extinction and survival resonates beyond science. It touches on philosophy, on identity, on meaning. It reminds us that life is not simple, that categories blur, that survival takes many forms. It reminds us that to exist is not only to live in the present, but to echo through the future, to endure in others, to continue invisibly. The Denisovans show us that absence is not always absence, that extinction is not always final, that the past is never truly gone. In this way, they are not just a mystery of science, but a lesson of existence. They teach us that legacy matters, that what we give to others endures, that survival is not only about ourselves, but about what we leave behind. They remind us that we too are fragile, but also that fragility does not mean futility. Even if we vanish, something of us may remain. Even if our cultures fade, our presence may continue. In this, we are like them,
The fire in Denisova Cave may be gone, but its warmth lingers in us. Their voices may be silent, but their whispers remain in our genes. Their bodies may be dust, but their legacy breathes in our lungs. They are extinct, and yet they are a finger bone long enough for science to find it. But elsewhere, their traces may lie waiting, buried deep, eroded by water, hidden beneath layers of earth. Somewhere in Asia, perhaps in a remote valley of Tibet, perhaps in a cave in Indonesia, the bones of Denisovans may still rest. The search continues. Archaeologists sift soil in Siberia, test sediments in caves, comb valleys for clues. One of the most promising techniques is sediment DNA analysis. Even when bones are absent, DNA can linger in soil, shed by skin cells, hair, fluids. In Denisova Cave, sediment DNA revealed their presence in layers where no fossils were found. This technique is now spreading worldwide. Caves in Tibet, in China, in Southeast Asia are being tested. And with each test, the chance of discovering new traces grows. In the soil beneath our feet, the Denisovans may still speak. Advances in genetics also push the frontier. The first Denisovan genome, sequenced in 2010, was a marvel. Today, sequencing is faster, cheaper, more precise. Scientists can extract DNA from teeth, from bones, even from hardened plaque on ancient molars. In this plaque, remnants of meals, microbes, and DNA linger, preserved for tens of thousands of years. Already such techniques have revealed Neanderthal diets, their bacteria, their health. Applied to Denisovans, they could reveal what they ate, what illnesses they carried, what lives they lived. Each fragment of DNA is a time capsule, waiting to be unlocked. Technology also allows us to reconstruct faces from genomes. From the Denisovan genome, scientists have modeled possible features: broad skulls, wide jaws, strong builds. Yet these are only approximations. A full skeleton, or even a skull, could transform our understanding, showing us exactly how they looked, how they walked, how they held themselves. The Harbin skull in China, massive and enigmatic, has been linked by some to Denisovans. If confirmed, it would offer the first true face of this mysterious people. More fossils like it may lie hidden, waiting for discovery. The promise of future discoveries is not only in bones merged, where one replaced the other. Each discovery sharpens the picture, narrowing the unknown. One day we may know not only that Denisovans vanished, but why. But perhaps the greatest promise of future discovery is the reminder that the story is not finished. Too often we think of the past as closed, fixed, unchangeable. Yet with each spade of soil, with each sequenced genome, the past shifts. The Denisovans, unknown 20 years ago, are now central to our understanding of humanity. Who knows what the next 20 years will reveal? Another fossil, another genome, another surprise that rewrites the story. The past is not fixed. It is unfolding, and the Denisovans are at its heart. The documentary might now show scientists at work, brushing soil in Siberia, drilling into teeth in a lab, staring at screens of DNA code. Over these images, the narrator's voice would say, in fragments of bone, in grains of soil, in strands of DNA, the Denisovans wait. They wait for us to find them, to hear them, to see them. They are gone, but not silent. They whisper in the earth, in the genes, in the mysteries yet to be solved. This forward-looking vision also connects to us more personally. For in studying the Denisovans, we are not only seeking them, we are seeking ourselves. Each discovery is a mirror, showing us what it means to be human, what it means to survive, what it means to endure. The Denisovans are not only a mystery of the past, they are a guide to the present, a warning for the future, a reminder that survival is fragile, that resilience is precious, that legacy is deeper than we imagine. Perhaps one day, a child will walk into a cave in Asia and see a fossil gleaming in the light of her lamp. Perhaps she will bring it to science, and it will be Denisovan. Perhaps then, we will finally see their face clearly, finally understand their world, finally answer the questions that linger. Until then, the Denisovans remain what they have always been: mysterious, elusive, present in absence.
We long to see their faces, hear their voices, touch the tools they shaped with their hands. We long to know if they sang, if they painted, if they buried their dead with care. We long to know their dreams, their fears, their joys. But much of this may be lost forever, erased by time, silenced by chance. We may never know them fully. We may only glimpse them, like stars behind clouds, present but unseen. This absence itself is a lesson. It reminds us how fragile memory is, how easily lives vanish without trace. It reminds us that survival is not guaranteed, that even the strongest can fade. It reminds us that humanity is not one straight line but many branches, most of them cut short, most of them forgotten. We are the exception, not the rule. The Denisovans are the rule, a testament to how much has been lost. And yet, in their loss, they gave us something profound: their genes, their adaptations, their resilience. They gave us the ability to breathe at the roof of the world, to endure pathogens, to store energy, to survive where otherwise we might have failed. They gave us not only life but diversity, strength, possibility. They vanished, but in vanishing they became part of us. Their extinction was not the end, but a transformation. In us, they live. To reflect on this is to reflect on ourselves. Who are we, if not a blend of many? Who are we if not the children of Neanderthals, of Denisovans, of ghost lineages we have yet to name? We are not pure. We are not singular. We are a tapestry, a chorus, a family. To deny this is to deny ourselves. To embrace it is to embrace the fullness of humanity. The Denisovans also remind us of our fragility. They were strong, adaptable, resilient, and still, they vanished. What does that say of us? We too face climate change, disease, competition, fragility. We too depend on cooperation, on knowledge, on adaptability. We are not invincible. We are not eternal. To know the Denisovans is to be humbled, to see our reflection in their disappearance. Rose. The Denisovans, unknown for so long, now stand among us again, not as strangers, but as kin. The scene then shifts outward. Snow falls across Siberia. Winds sweep across Tibet. Rain lashes Southeast Asian forests. Waves crash on Pacific shores. Across each landscape, human faces appear. Tibetan monks chanting, Papuan children laughing, Melanesian dancers moving in rhythm. The narrator continues, "They are not gone. They are here, in every breath at high altitude, in every immune response, in every adaptation that carries us forward. They are not gone. They live in us." The music swells,
The images dissolve into a final vision, a strand of DNA glowing against a dark background, slowly unraveling into a web, each thread connecting past to present, Denisovan to Homo sapiens, ancient to modern. The narrator's final words rise above the music. The Denisovans are the most mysterious of our kin. Their fires are cold, their voices silent, their name nearly forgotten. And yet, they are part of us. Their mystery endures, their legacy lives, their story continues, woven into the story of humanity itself. The Denisovans are gone, but not lost. They are us. The screen fades to black. Silence lingers. The mystery remains.